Son-in-law left for a business trip on a Monday morning. I remember because I was standing at the kitchen window watching his rental car back out of the driveway, and I thought, finally, some quiet. That thought would come back to haunt me later. His name is Derek, 41 years old, corporate attorney, the kind of man who irons his shirts on Sunday nights and schedules his own haircuts 3 months in advance. My daughter Fiona had been with him for 9 years, married for 6. I'd never fully trusted him, but I told myself that was just a father thing. You never think anyone is good enough for your daughter. That's what I told myself. Fiona had stopped driving about 2.5 years before any of this happened. She said it started with anxiety, then it became something bigger. She couldn't leave the house some days, couldn't even walk to the mailbox at the end of the driveway without breaking into a cold sweat. Derek handled everything: groceries, appointments, bills. He said he didn't mind. He said it with a smile that I now understand was not kindness. It was control. I'm 68 years old. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer before I retired, and I like to think I'm a reasonably observant man. But I missed it. For 2.5 years, I visited my daughter every Sunday, sat on their porch, drank coffee, watched her fade a little more each time, and I missed it completely. The business trip was supposed to be 10 days. Chicago, then Denver, then back. On the 3rd day, I heard a knock at my door at 7:40 in the morning. I wasn't even dressed yet. I had my reading glasses on and a cup of coffee in my hand, and when I opened the door, Fiona was standing on my front step. No coat, even though it was 42 degrees. She was shaking, but not the way someone shakes from cold. The way someone shakes when they've been holding something in for a very long time and they finally decided to let it out. I dropped my coffee mug. It bounced off the porch and cracked in half on the step below. I barely noticed. "Dad," she said, "I need to show you something." I hadn't seen my daughter stand on my doorstep, unannounced, alone, having driven herself in over 2 years. I grabbed her arm. I thought something terrible had happened. I thought she was hurt, that there'd been an accident, that someone had died. She wasn't hurt. But what she told me next, that took about an hour to get through, and by the end of it, I was the one sitting down. She came inside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a teenager, and she put a manila folder in front of me. Inside were documents, bank statements, a promissory note I had apparently signed, a trust modification with my signature on it dated 8 months earlier. I looked at her. I said, "I never signed these." She said, "I know. Here's what I need you to understand about my finances, because it matters. After my wife Carol passed away 6 years ago, I inherited the house outright and had a modest but stable retirement, pension from the county, Social Security, and a brokerage account that Carol and I had built together over 40 years. Nothing extravagant, but enough, more than enough for one person to live on comfortably and still leave something behind for Fiona. About a year after Carol died, Derek came to me with what he called an opportunity. He was calm about it, very professional. Of course he was. He's a lawyer. And he explained that he had a colleague starting a private equity fund focused on commercial real estate in the Southeast. He said the returns were projected at 12 to 15% annually. He said the minimum investment was $50,000, but for family, his colleague would accept 25. I said I'd think about it. He came back to me 3 more times over the next year. Each time, I said I'd think about it. I never invested. I wasn't comfortable with it. And Carol had always said, if someone keeps pushing you towards something, that's the thing you walk away from. I should have paid more attention to what else Derek was doing while I kept saying I'd think about it. Fiona spread the documents out on the table one by one. I put my reading glasses back on and looked at each one carefully. The promissory note was for $40,000, supposedly a loan I made to a limited liability company called Southeastern Horizon Ventures, LLC. My signature was at the bottom. The LLC, she told me, was registered to Derek's colleague. The same one from the investment pitch. The date on the note was 14 months earlier. I had never heard of Southeastern Horizon Ventures, LLC. I had certainly never lent anyone $40,000. The trust modification was worse. Carol and I had set up a revocable living trust years ago, with Fiona as the sole beneficiary. The modification reduced Fiona's share to 40% and added Derek as a co-beneficiary at 30%, with the remaining 30% going to a charitable organization I had never chosen. My signature was on the modification. A notary stamp. Everything looked legitimate. I sat there for a long moment. I'm not a man who cries easily. I've only cried twice in my adult life, when my father died and when Carol died. But I'll tell you honestly, sitting at that kitchen table with those documents in front of me, I came close. I said, "How long have you known?" Fiona said. 7 months. I said, 7 months. She nodded. She didn't look away. She told me she'd found the promissory note by accident. She'd been looking for a utility bill in Derek's home office. He handled all the household finances, always had, from the very beginning of their relationship. And she'd found a folder she didn't recognize. She opened it. She saw my name on the note. She saw $40,000, and she did something that I think took more courage than most people understand. She put the folder back exactly where she found it, closed the drawer, and said nothing. For 7 months, she said nothing. She spent those 7 months learning. She started small, borrowing Derek's password from a sticky note he kept under his keyboard, which she'd noticed years earlier and he'd apparently forgotten about. She accessed the household account. She started making copies. When Derek traveled, she would photograph documents with her phone, then put everything back. She created a folder on a cloud drive he didn't know about, and slowly, piece by piece, she built a record. What she found wasn't just the promissory note and the trust modification. There were emails discussing the forgeries, not Derek's emails, because he was too careful for that, but his colleagues. She found a wire transfer from an account in my name to the LLC, made 11 months ago, $6,200. Then another 4 months later for $4,400. She found a third-party property management company tied back to Derek's colleague that had received consulting fees from my account. Small amounts, $200 and $300 at a time. Irregular enough that they'd never tripped any automatic alerts. In total, between the forged promissory note, the fraudulent wire transfers, the trust modification, and the small recurring transfers, Derek had positioned himself to take or had already taken somewhere between $50,000 and $65,000 from me. My money. Carol's money. The money we'd saved for 30 years. I'm 68 years old, and I will tell you what that number means. When you're 68 and retired, it means a portion of your security. It means years. It means the difference between being fine and having to make choices you shouldn't have to make. I asked Fiona, "Does he know you know?" She said, "No." I asked, "Are you safe?" She said, "He's never touched me. But no, I don't think I'm safe." That was the sentence that changed everything for me, not the money. The money made me angry. That sentence made me afraid, and then it made me very, very still. There's a particular kind of calm that comes over me sometimes in a crisis. My wife used to call it my engineer brain. When something is broken and needs to be fixed, I stop feeling and start thinking. It's not that the feeling goes away, it's that it moves aside and waits. I went into that mode at my kitchen table. I told Fiona to leave her car in my garage. I didn't want Derek to know she'd come to me if he happened to drive past. I made a fresh pot of coffee and we sat there for another 2 hours, and I asked her to tell me everything in order from the beginning. She did. While she talked, I wrote things down in the yellow legal pad I keep by the phone. I've kept a legal pad by the phone since 1987, and I've gone through probably 300 of them. Derek would not find that suspicious if he ever looked. It just looked like grocery lists. By the time Fiona finished, I had 4 pages of notes. I had a name, Derek's colleague, a man named, for these purposes I'll say what Fiona called him, which was his partner, who appeared to be the one who had physically forged the documents and set up the LLC. I had account numbers. I had dates. I had a cloud drive full of photographs that Fiona had spent 7 months collecting. The first call I made was to my own attorney. Not a friend, not a family contact, my actual attorney, a woman named Christine who had handled Carol's estate and who I trusted completely. I called her at 8:30 in the morning and she answered on the second ring because Christine always answers on the second ring. I told her I had a situation. She told me to come to her office at 1 o'clock and to bring everything. The next thing I did was call my bank. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't want to tip anything off until I'd spoken with Christine. But I asked them to flag my account for any unusual activity and to hold any transfers pending my authorization. They sent me a form. I filled it out and faxed it from the machine in my office that I bought in 2009 and still works perfectly. Then I made Fiona breakfast. She hadn't eaten. She'd driven to my house on 3 cups of coffee and 7 months of adrenaline. And she sat at my kitchen table and ate scrambled eggs and toast, and I watched her eat them. And I thought about how she used to sit in that same chair at 8 years old and eat her cereal before school. And I had to look out the window for a minute. Christine was thorough. She went through every document, asked Fiona 40 minutes of questions, and then sat back in her chair and said, "This is wire fraud, elder financial abuse under Georgia Code, and forgery, potentially identity theft depending on how the signatures were obtained. This is not a civil matter. This is criminal." She told us our next step was to contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit, not local law enforcement, because the transactions crossed state lines given the LLC was registered in Florida. She also told us to contact the Georgia Secretary of State's office regarding the LLC. She told us one more thing. Do not confront Derek. Do not let him know anything has changed. Let him come home from his trip, let him act normally, and let law enforcement make contact on their timeline. I looked at Fiona. Fiona nodded. I'm going to be honest with you. Those 7 remaining days waiting for Derek to come home from his trip were among the hardest days I have had since Carol died. Not because I was afraid, because I had to sit with it. Every Sunday I drove to their house for the usual visit, and I sat on that porch and I drank coffee. And Derek was there on the phone from Chicago, telling Fiona he missed her, and I had to listen to that and drink my coffee and talk about the weather. On the 6th day, the GBI contacted me directly. They had reviewed the documents Fiona had provided through Christine's office. They confirmed what Christine had told us. They told me they had enough to proceed. They told me Derek would be met at Hartsfield-Jackson when he landed. I did not go to the airport. Christine advised against it, and she was right. But I was awake at 5:45 that morning, sitting in my armchair in the living room with the lamp on, just sitting there. Not reading, not watching television, just sitting there. Not reading, not watching television, just sitting. My phone rang at 8:22 a.m. It was Fiona. She said 3 words, "They got him." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I will be." Derek was arrested at the gate. His colleague had already been picked up in Tampa the previous afternoon. The GBI had moved on both of them simultaneously to prevent either one from alerting the other. Derek's colleague had been less careful about digital communications, and his emails provided the evidence that confirmed Derek's involvement in directing the scheme. The charges, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery, and conspiracy. His colleague faced additional charges related to the LLC and the fraudulent investment fund, which had apparently claimed other victims besides me, 3 other retired individuals in the Atlanta metropolitan area. Derek's law license was suspended pending the criminal proceedings. That happened within the week. Here's what I want to tell you about Fiona. She had not been broken. I had believed she was broken. Not consciously, not cruelly, but I had looked at my daughter over 2.5 years and seen someone diminished, and I had grieved that quietly, the way you grieve something that's still alive. I was wrong. What I had seen was someone choosing her timing, someone collecting evidence, protecting herself, figuring out who she could trust and when she could move. Her therapist. Yes, she had a therapist. She'd been seeing one in secret via telehealth because Derek monitored their shared calendar. Her therapist told me later that what Fiona had demonstrated was not weakness, but a very specific kind of survival intelligence. The morning she came to my door, she had driven herself for the first time in over 2 years. She told me afterward that she sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before she could put the car in reverse. Then she drove 23 minutes to my house without stopping. I think about those 11 minutes a lot. Within 3 months of Derek's arrest, Fiona had moved out of their house and into the apartment 2 miles from me that she chose herself, signed herself, and furnished with things she picked out over 2 weekends of real shopping. She started driving regularly about 6 weeks after he was arrested. Not everywhere, not all at once, but she went to the grocery store alone. She went to her own doctor's appointments. She came to my house on Sunday mornings without calling first, the way she used to before all of this. The first Sunday she showed up unannounced. I opened the door and she was standing there with a bag from the bakery down the street, the good one, the one that does the almond croissants Carol used to love. She said, "I brought breakfast." I said, "You drove." She said, "I brought breakfast." I said, "You drove." She said, "Obviously." I laughed. I don't know when I'd last laughed like that. Genuinely, without thinking about it first. As for the financial piece, The court issued a restitution order as part of the plea agreement. I don't expect to see all of it. Christine was honest with me about that, but a significant portion of the forged promissory note amount was recoverable, and the fraudulent trust modification was voided in full. What mattered more to me, and I surprised myself with this, was not the money. It was the trust modification. The idea that someone had tried to reach forward in time and take something I had meant for my daughter. That was the part I needed undone. It was undone. Derek is currently awaiting sentencing. His colleague has already pled guilty and received 41 months in federal prison plus restitution obligations. Derek's attorney is negotiating. I've been told not to expect that process to be fast. I'm not in a hurry. I've waited before. I want to say one thing to anyone listening to this, who might be in a situation where someone close to you is handling your money, managing your accounts, making your appointments, controlling what you see and what you sign. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I believe in family. I believe in trust. And I am telling you, look at your own accounts. Not because everyone is dishonest. Because the people who do this choose their targets carefully, and they choose people who trust too easily and check too rarely. I check now. Every month I go through every line. Carol would have caught it sooner. She was always better at that than I was. I think about that sometimes. Not with guilt, just with honesty. She would have seen it in month 2 and called Derek herself, and told him exactly what she thought of him. I can hear exactly how she would have said it, but Fiona caught it. And Fiona was patient and methodical and brilliant in a way that I had not fully seen before, and she came to my door on a cold Wednesday morning, and she showed me what she'd found, and she saved both of us. That's the part I think about most. Not the fraud, not the arrest, not the court dates. The 11 minutes she sat in her own driveway before she put the car in reverse, and then the 23 minutes she drove to my house. And when she knocked on my door, when I opened it and saw her standing there, that was the moment I understood that my daughter had never actually been lost. She'd just been waiting for the right time to come home. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical way. I'm an engineer, I think in systems. Every outcome has an input. Every consequence traces back to a choice. Sometimes many choices stacked on top of each other over years. Derek made choices. Small ones at first, probably. A document here, a signature there. Each one easier than the last because nothing stopped him. That's how it works with people like him. They don't start with the big crime. They start with the small test. And when the small test passes, they get bolder. The system, as he saw it, was working. What he didn't account for was that someone else was also watching the system. Someone he had underestimated completely. That's the part I keep coming back to. He underestimated Fiona. He'd spent years, whether deliberately or just by habit. I honestly don't know which is worse, making her smaller, making her dependent, making her the kind of person who needed him to buy groceries and manage the calendar and handle the bills. And it worked for a while, in the sense that she became those things visibly. But underneath that, she was paying attention. She was building something. She was waiting. Intelligence isn't always loud. I've known brilliant engineers who barely spoke in meetings. I've known the smartest person in a room to be the one sitting quietly in the corner taking notes, while everyone else performed. Fiona was doing that for 7 months. She saw the document, she felt the fear, and then instead of reacting from that fear, she thought. She planned. She was methodical in a way that and I say this with complete honesty, I don't know if I could have managed in her position. That's what I mean when I say this story is really about her, not me. There's something I've come to believe about character, and I didn't have words for it until this happened. Character isn't who you are when things are easy. It's who you are when you're afraid, when you're isolated, when someone has spent years convincing you that you're not capable. Fiona sat in that driveway for 11 minutes, and then she put the car in reverse. That's not a small thing. That is the whole thing, actually. As for me, I learned that love is not the same as paying attention. I loved my daughter every Sunday I sat on that porch and watched her, but I wasn't looking closely enough. I told myself a comfortable story. She's struggling. She'll get better. Derek takes good care of her. I chose the easier interpretation because the harder one was something I didn't want to face. I'm facing it now. And what I've decided, practically not as some grand declaration, is that the people I love deserve my actual attention. Not my presence, my attention. There's a difference. What happened to me financially was recoverable. What almost happened to my daughter, the slow erasure of her confidence, her independence, her sense of what she was capable of, that was the real theft. And the fact that it didn't succeed permanently is entirely because of who she is, not anything I did. She drove herself to my house. She sat at my table. She showed me the truth. I just had the good sense to believe her.